Student behaviors is the number one thing that teachers tell me they're struggling with. It could be whole class issues or classroom management strategies that are just not working. Sometimes it's one or two or three kids that are just giving them the hardest time. In my last episode, I talked about 5 steps that you can take to navigate difficult behaviors. So if you haven't listened to that yet, please go back and check out that episode. But here's the thing, I didn't talk about the one true secret to improving student behaviors, and that's what I'm going to reveal to you today. And I want to give you a moment to see if you can guess what it is. Hey friends, welcome to Enjoy Teaching Again, the podcast for teachers who love the work but need a little spark to bring the joy back. I'm your host, Elizabeth Peterson, classroom teacher, arts integration specialist, and passionate educator of over 25 years. If you're overwhelmed by behaviors, disengaged students, and long, exhausting days, you are not alone. But together, we can turn things around and you can teach with confidence and purpose again. So locate that cold coffee of yours, find your favorite pen, I know you have one, and let's dive in. It's time to get inspired and enjoy teaching again. You've been at this for a while and maybe you want to think about resetting your classroom, but you feel like it's going to take forever, or maybe it's going to be complicated, or it might even be a little expensive. Listen, that is not the case. And if I'm anything, I am practical and I want your resetting experience to be meaningful. That's why the Classroom Reset is designed to make this easy and fun. We'll explore practical, creative strategies to keep your students engaged and excited to learn, dynamic classroom management tips that actually work, and arts-based activities that boost your students' social emotional growth. And the best part? This approach is going to feel natural, effortless, and like second nature in your everyday teaching. That's the point. It's not about doing more, it's about resetting what you already do. You can dive in and implement these strategies right away, step by step, at your own pace. No fancy equipment, no overwhelming lesson plans, and no need to buy a bunch of new stuff. I'll show you how to integrate these creative strategies into what you're already doing so that you can see real change, real fast, and with the support that you need and deserve. So join me inside the Classroom Reset experience. Let's transform your classroom together faster than you thought possible. Head over to theinspiredclassroom.com/reset to get started. Okay, so what is that number one secret? Did you take a moment to think about it? Do you have some ideas? I bet you know what it is. And don't roll your eyes when I say it, okay? Because you know deep down in your heart that it's true. The number one secret to improving student behavior? It's connection. Yep, building relationships and having a connection with your students. You just can't get around it. It's a basic need that all humans have. It's one of the necessary components to have before you can find success in other things. Connection is one of the ground levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it's only put in there after food and water and safety. Connection is the antidote to depression. And connection, it leads to trust, it leads to a sense of belonging, and in the classroom, it can also lead to a willingness to learn. You just cannot underestimate the value of making genuine connection with your students. And they know if you're not genuine or not, right? Kids can just sense that. And how you foster genuine connection with students? Well, there are so many ways, and I have so many resources on my website, The Inspired Classroom, and certainly inside the Classroom Reset, my 6-month reset experience. But connection isn't just about being the cool teacher. Connection goes way deeper. And today I want to share a couple of real ways that you can address student behavior through connection. So what I want you to do is I want you to think about a student right now that you have, or maybe you had in the past, that was giving you some trouble. a nudge, a kid who didn't follow through with things, a kid that didn't really care about school, a kid who acts up and disrupts the class. Maybe it's a kid who's always grumpy or negative, or who's an issue at lunch or at recess. All right, do you have a student in mind? Maybe you have more than one. Well, I want you to just pick one student and put that student in your mind. And as I go through these 3 things, I want you to visualize yourself with that student making a connection and see which one of these ways makes the most sense. And then at the end, of course, I'm going to challenge you to actually go ahead and follow through and make that genuine connection with that student and see what happens. All right, let's get into those ways. Okay, the first way is going to seem so simple, but hear me out. I want you to just find a time to sit down with the student for a private conference. It seems so simple, right? But actually taking the time and having a thoughtful conversation with the student, not you talking at them, but you asking them a question and then inviting them to talk and then genuinely listening to what they have to say. So if you have a student who's being really disruptive, tell them how you feel about that, what that does for the class and for, your teaching, you're being able to teach the whole class or being able to teach that kid, and then see what they have to say. Mention something, ask them a question, and then keep quiet and wait for them to talk and see what they have to say. So I remember so many years ago when I was teaching in middle school music, I had this one student who was fairly new to the school, and he was in 7th grade at the time. He was so distracting. He was such a behavior issue in all of his classes, mine included. The poor kid, he was homeless. He was probably not going to be at that school for very long. And you know what? He knew it. And so he wasn't going to put in any effort, and he certainly wasn't going to put in some time to make friends or make some good connections, because he probably figured that he wasn't going to be there very long. But in the meantime, he was also a huge behavior problem in my classroom, and he was preventing all the other students from being able to learn. And so I decided one day to pull him out of lunch and just have a conversation. So my classroom at the time was right behind the stage, which was right behind the cafeteria. So I went out, I found him, I asked him to come back to my classroom, and he did. He was fine about that. And we sat in the classroom and I just talked to him. I asked him to just level with me. I wanted to know what his deal was. I wanted to know why he was acting the way that he was. I wanted to give him the opportunity to maybe think about some of the choices that he was making and maybe see if he could start making some better choices. Now, did I turn his entire world around? Did I solve all of his problems? Absolutely not. I don't think there would be any teacher who could really truly do that for this poor kid. But in that time, I was able to start a connection with him. That conversation that I had with him allowed me a little bit more of an opening to be able to check in with him every so often. Sometimes I would stop him and I'd ask him how his math class was going. And then I'd say, "Hey, can I check in with your math teacher?" And he'd be like, "Yeah, whatever, that's fine." And that was enough connection. Side note, that kid, Jeremy, he is one of those kids that I just don't know what ever happened with him. And, it's my hope and prayer that he's out there somewhere being successful in something. So, Jeremy, if you're listening, you let me know, okay? All right, the next idea is to actually bring in the parents for a group conference. Now, I literally just did this earlier today, on the day that I'm actually recording this, and it was quite successful, I have to say. Now, as time goes on, we'll see how much more successful it is or not, But this isn't the first time I've done this, and maybe it's not the first time you've heard this or tried this yourself, but I want you to consider, is the student that you have in mind someone that you might want to actually bring in the parents and have a conference with the parents and the student? If it's the right situation, it can work really, really well because the student can see that there's communication between home and school. He can see that there's support for his success. And depending on how you approach the meeting and how you approach that conference, he can get a sense that you are genuinely trying to make a good connection with him so that he can be successful. So in this type of conference, again, it's not about talking at the parents or talking at the student. It's laying out what's been going on and inviting both the student and the parents to figure out what the solution could be. That showing of genuine care and curiosity can really help to build a connection between you and that student. Emphasize the support that you want to give and the success that you want to see, and together you guys can start to come up with a plan. The third and final idea that I have for you is to start conversations in the morning with that student. This way you can, aside from just greeting the student, but actually start some conversations. And I have a podcast episode that talks about greeting and then taking that to the next level with conversation starters and questions you can ask. So I'm going to link that in the show notes. But this way to build connection is probably the most casual and not pressure way to do so. In other words, you're not singling out per se the student by asking them to have a private conference with you, and certainly not singling them out by having a whole parent conference with just them and the parents. So this worked so well for me a number of years ago with a student. I'll call him Sam. Sam would always come to school so grumpy, so disconnected, so shut down. He did not want to do any work, period, end of story. And it just started every day very, very difficultly. So what I decided to do was I decided that every single day for the next week, and then it turned into 2 weeks, I was going to start up a conversation with him. And it started very simply, making sure I said hello, asking him a simple question, how was your morning? Or mentioning something that, I noticed that, he brought in his homework, and I would just make a little connection and try and start a conversation with him every single morning. Well, eventually I got the jackpot because one day he brought in a Rubik's Cube and he started fumbling with it. And I mentioned it to him and I said, "Hey, that's a really cool Rubik's Cube. Is that yours?" And he would say, "Yeah." And I said, "Do you know how to do it?" And he'd say, "Yeah, I do." And he started playing with it, and I complimented him, and I was like, "You really do that well. I'm impressed with how fast you can move it with your fingers. That's really cool." That was the cincher right there. He started to talk to me, and it was amazing. We had a conversation about the Rubik's Cube. He showed it to me a little later that day as well. And every morning after that, I would continue asking him a question or starting a conversation. And slowly but surely, he started having better and better mornings. In fact, and I swear by this, if I didn't have a small conversation with Sam in the morning, he had a bad morning. And if I did, he was set up for success. That connection that I slowly but surely made with Sam made all the difference in his behavior. Were there hiccups? Of course. Were there glitches? Absolutely. But I'm telling you, me putting in that effort, oh my gosh, it just made such a world of difference for Sam. And quite honestly, it made a world of difference for me as well. Now, you may have noticed a theme here in all three ways to build a connection with one of your students, and that is conversation and listening. Those things are just so important for any human connection to thrive. And oftentimes we just don't have the time for that in our busy, busy day and in our busy, busy minds for that matter. So that student that you had in mind, can you see yourself trying one of these things with them? It could make such a world of difference for you and for that student. So, as you know, that's going to be my challenge for you this week. I want you to find that student, if it's a student that you currently have, or maybe it's even a student that's still in the school, but you don't necessarily have as a student. This kind of connection can benefit, it can benefit the student so much, even if they're not your actual student right now. So I want you to find that student this week and start making a connection by starting a conversation, inviting that student to talk to you, and then listen. Will it change the world? Maybe not, but will it make a difference? It absolutely will. And I can't wait for you to make your next connection. I hope this episode inspired you, encouraged you, or gave you a fresh idea to try. And if so, I would love for you to take a screenshot and text it to one of your teaching buddies. I'm so grateful that you landed here with me today, and it would mean the world to me if you would leave me a review over on Apple Podcast. Thanks so much for being here, and I'll catch you on the next episode. This is Elizabeth Peterson reminding you to get inspired so you can be inspiring to your students and enjoy teaching again.